Good morning, everyone. My name is Jesse, and today I'd like to talk to you guys about environmental policy making. And I think this is a really important topic for us to talk about, considering the flooding that Southeast Michigan has been facing this year and this season. Before we get started, I'd like to say that the June flooding of this year is the worst flooding Michigan has received in the last 7 years, and it caused over $1.8 billion worth of damages. And I think this sets an important backdrop for talking about environmental policy making, because on top of all those damages, this stuff gets really dangerous and people can lose their lives over it. On top of that, it's financially inefficient to constantly be fixing all these damages, and the problem will only get worse if no action is taken against these increasing weather-related disasters. The purpose of my speech today is to kind of lay down some evidence on why environmentally conscientious policymaking is important and why the effects of not making good policymaking, and to hopefully garner your support to advocate for this type of policymaking in the future. And to get started, I'd like everyone to think about the state of New York. New York is right on the coast of the Atlantic Ocean, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration says that 50% of the United States coastline is vulnerable to sea rise, and New York City is included in that. New York City is home of some of the most valuable real estate in the world, and over $100 billion worth of properties at risk should New York sink due to rising sea levels or flood-related disasters or natural storms that are occurring. When Hurricane Sandy came through the region in about 2012, it cost the New York City about $60 billion worth of damages, and over 88,000 buildings were flooded. On top of that, only 43 people lost their lives. While it may seem like a small, insignificant number for a weather-related emergency, every life is super important, and the people who didn't die, the residents of those 88,000 buildings, likely a lot of their livelihood was destroyed. And while you may not be dead, that's bringing you pretty close. And so, into the next point on how financially inefficient it is to keep repairing these damages is that the efforts gone towards mitigating these weather-related disasters isn't really good for the long term. It's really only a band-aid for a more serious injury. And so, the National Flood Insurance Program is one example, and it was established in 1968. And in 1973, it was made mandatory for anyone with a federally backed mortgage who was living in an area at risk of a 100-year flood. They had to be backed by this insurance program. And while that's really great and you want to mitigate these damages, there are also 1,000-year floods, which are the projected rainfall over the next 1,000 years. And we've entered an age in society where if the planet isn't destroyed, we can definitely make it another 1,000 years. So we need to think long term about the effects of where we're living. And these 100-year floods are only getting more intense because as the planet warms, these disasters only get more extreme. In the 1970s, the United States averaged about 18 natural disasters a year, and in the early 2000s, that number went up to about 56 natural disasters a year. And natural disasters don't necessarily mean Hurricane Katrina or Hurricane Sandy. That can be included in the flooding that happened to our region just this June. It cost $1.8 billion. $56 billion a year is a lot to just be putting band-aids on things when we could be making more long-term solutions. And another example is that FEMA has given one county in Virginia over $11 billion to raise their houses to help mitigate this damage of sea rise and flood control. But if all the roads in the region are flooded up, the houses are still there, but the roads are rendered useless, and this infrastructure is rendered useless. And I mean, we could have a nice little boat city, but still all the other infrastructure, the sewage, all this stuff is rendered useless because it's all underwater. Everyone would just be driving in their own waste and all this stuff. And if nothing is done, the problem is only going to get worse. Michigan I-96 is just going to keep flooding. Power lines in Texas are going to keep melting. California will stay on fire, and people's houses will keep getting flooded out. and everyone will have damages, and it'll just be a vicious perpetual cycle unless we make serious change towards either slowing the effects of climate change or moving people further inland, which some programs have already offered money to do, move people inland away from the coasts to try and get them away from the effects of sea rise. But these effects can be slowed and they can be mitigated better if we just have better policy making. And so I thank you guys for listening to me speak today, and I hope to see you guys at the next voting booth advocating for this.